Now it's time to create a landscape in gouache using black and white. In your watercolor pad, go ahead and tape off a rectangle. I went ahead and taped down like about 1.5 inches from the top, just so I wouldn't have to waste as much paint. You can do that as well. We will be using our flat watercolor brush for this next step. Since we will only be using 2 paints, we're going to use a foam paper plate for mixing. Right here I have a bowl, but you're going to get a plate because it has more room. And so you're going to go ahead and take your brush, dip it in water, and just start mixing that black paint. You want an melted ice cream consistency, really thick and smooth. You don't want it thick and sticky. And once you get enough paint on that brush, it's time to start painting. With your brush loaded with black paint, you're going to go ahead and start painting from the very top, going left and right and left, back and forth, but also moving down. You're going to just keep moving down, and I would say probably just about a quarter ways from the top. You don't want to go too low because you're going to be adding white next. But let's say you have some transparency. Go ahead and grab some more paint and cover up any of the transparency with the black paint. At this point, you should not have a lot of paint on that brush. So without washing it, you're going to dip your brush in part of that white paint. Not the whole glob of white paint, but just off to the side, grab some of that white paint, and you're going to go ahead and brush that also horizontally back and forth. But you're going to start just at the bottom, overlapping that black. And so it'll start mixing like a nice gray. I'm wiping some of that gray off my brush, picking up some more white, and I'm putting that white just below that gray. And as you notice that it's a little too thick, so I needed to mix my white with more water. So I just added a little bit of water by touching the tip of the paintbrush, and I dipped it in my white, and I'm adding more. And so what I'm doing now is I'm trying to blend it all out. You want like a gradient effect, and so you're going to keep moving it, and you will probably keep adding some white towards the bottom to get it to blend better. Now you don't want to go too far down. You want to leave, I would say a quarter of the page unpainted at the bottom. So I'm going to continue to add some more white paint and keep blending down and then moving it up. I ran out of white. You may run out too, and if you do, just let me know. I have some extra. But again, you don't want to overdo it. You want to make sure you mix it with water so it has that melted ice cream consistency. That will make your white paint go a long way. Ultimately, this is what you want the background to look like. It's very black at the top. It's painted all the way to the tape, even over the tape. And then it starts to become a little bit darker gray, and then it becomes a lighter gray. You should have some clean white paint on your palette. Make sure it's the perfect consistency and start painting about 2 inches above the bottom of that skyline. And you're just going to paint the tip of that mountain. And using the reference printout, you can go ahead and copy that. You can create your own edges or whatever, but just make sure that it goes down just like the reference photo. Okay, so some of the background is going to show through, but that's okay because that's only going to help the design. And again, if we need that tip of that mountain to be really white, we can always wait for the paint to dry and add another layer at the top. We definitely need to add some value to this painting. So we have it already. We have a white mountain against a gray sky, but now we want to add some dimension to the mountain. So I'm going to add a little bit of gray, and I'm going to start playing with it and adding some detail to the mountain to give it some dimension. You don't want to go too dark, but you just want it enough that you can tell that the mountain isn't flat. This is where it gets a little tricky. Now you're going to add the mountains that are in front of the white mountain, and you want to make sure that the gray that you mix is actually going to be a gray that's going to be just a little bit darker than the sky. As you see here, I feel like mine is a little too dark. So I made the mistake of making it too dark. But I want you to make sure that you mix it so that it's close to the color of the sky, but darker than the color of the sky. Just a tad darker. And again, remember, it might look darker, but then it's going to dry lighter. So make sure you kind of make that blend just right. And if you mess up, then you can just go ahead and add some more lighter gray on top of that to fix it. Now you want to paint far enough down so that you have room for 2 more mountains, but you don't want to go all the way down because that's just kind of a waste of paint. So just take that in consideration as you paint down the second mountain. At this point, you're probably going to want to use your white gouache that's in your gouache palette right here, because we want this gouache to be very clean. You don't want any color in it. It just has to be pure white. And with a clean brush on this mountain that's already dry paint, you're going to add some more white to the top of the mountain because you want it to be as bright as possible. And even if it isn't, let it dry and then add more. So I noticed my mountain was too dark, so I went ahead and mixed a lighter gray and trying to make it lighter. Again, I don't know if I succeeded. I might have done this a couple of times. It's really hard to tell how it's going to dry. So if you're in doubt, just make it lighter. Lighter than what you think it needs to be. Now it's time to add the third mountain. I'm not even going to paint all the way down because I'm going to add something in front of this mountain. But I'm going to use a darker shade of gray. So we want it to be darker than the mountain behind it. So we don't want it to be completely black. We want it to be very, very dark gray. So again, you could make it not dark enough, or maybe it's too dark. There's ways to make it darker. There's ways to make it lighter. But go ahead and do that as your next step. Okay, so I'm adding the fourth and the last mountain. This is going to go at the bottom, the very bottom. And you're going to use pure black, and you're going to overlap that mountain behind it, but you still want that mountain to show at some point here and there in different areas. And when you paint this black mountain, this is where you're going to add some texture, like just little lines at the top. It'll represent trees at a distance, and so you're going to go ahead and do that throughout that entire last mountain. Now that my mountain is dry again, I'm going to add even more pure white to the mountain. You just got to keep adding it till it looks really nice and bright and white. And I'm only adding it to certain areas of the mountains that I want to really pop. I'm also using the white gouache to reshape my mountain, making it a little wider towards the bottom of the base, and also just adding some more details. In this video, I hope that you can see the last mountain, the darkest mountain in the front, better than the last video. And I hope you can see the little trees. I'm using a darker shade and a lighter tint to add texture to 2 of these mountains. I would say the second mountain and the third mountain for now. Now it's time to add some texture to the white mountain. Using your smallest brush possible. In fact, you may not have a small enough brush for these tiny strokes because your small brush might be kind of frayed. I'm not sure. But I brought some extra small brushes. Not a lot, but you can always share. Or you can try doing some, test painting on your scrap paper. But what I want you to do is I want you to mix a light gray, just a light gray, and make it a little watery, not very thick, not like melted ice cream, a little more watery than that. So you just want just a tiny bit, and just dip the tip of your brush in there. Make sure it's not dripping, and just start adding little dashes here and there. And don't be too worried about where you place it. Like, is this just as long as it's sporadic? There's areas where it doesn't have it and some areas where it does. Because after this, we're going to add some more. but a darker shade. So now with a very dark gray, very similar to the mixture you made before, kind of on the watery side, but it's pigmented and it's not dripping. You're gonna use your tiny brush and you're gonna do the same thing you did before. And I would add those darker spots and dashes around the other dashes that you made earlier. It's going to be like in the crevices and just different parts of the mountain. Take a look at your mountain carefully and say to yourself, where do you think this would look good, and put it there. And again, you're not going to put it all over the place, but just in certain areas. Again, you'll have a reference photo that will help you and give you an idea. So I was unsatisfied with my second mountain, so I'm just adding some more texture, a little bit darker texture to that. Adding some very small, tiny textured trees on this mountain. I'm also going to add some texture to the third mountain, and I want you to do that too. In fact, you probably should have added the texture before you added the fourth mountain, and I'll probably put that in your notes. But don't forget to texturize those mountains and add little tiny trees on those too. I added trees using a bit darker for these two mountains. Now it's time to add the moon. This is funny because I actually dropped a drop of water on my painting and it was right above the mountain. And I said, well, I guess that's the perfect spot to add the moon. So I added the moon over the stain and it came out great, but you can add the moon anywhere you want. So I used one layer of white for the moon. I let it dry a little bit and then I added a little bit more white around the edges because you know the moon always has like different shades in it anyway, so you don't want it pure white.